Well, there was a huge response to my latest requests for a Q&A. It's really taken a lot of time for questions to come in, and questions are still coming in, and there's so many that I think I'm going to have to do these answers in multiple parts, so let's go ahead and get started with them. And I said that if you were a patron, an answer was guaranteed. I did forget to say one thing that I said last time, which is still it's one question per patron, and if you asked more than one, I'd pick which one I wanted to do. I failed to say that this time, so since Huge Thinker asked more than one question, I think I'd better stay true to my word and answer both. So Huge Thinker asks, Shane, do you have any thoughts on Russian interference in the U.S. election and the CIA's input on that issue? Well, I might have if there were any actual evidence for it, but as I've said before in the podcast, if there is, our government's keeping that to themselves, so I can't rule it out. I can't say they weren't involved, but I've also said this before, there's not a whole lot that a government can do as far as cyber attacks is concerned that one of these enormous hacker organizations that exist today can't do. I mean, these things are huge. They have help desks and HR departments, and I mean, it is just crazy, and they operate anonymously on the dark web, but they're out there, and really the only thing the governments have that they don't is police powers, so I don't really know if you need to say, oh, this must have been the work of some government. If there's evidence it was Russia, I'll be glad to take a look at it, but everything I've seen before doesn't really pin it to any one person or group or government or whatever. And I mean, they were using pretty much standard utilities and techniques that hackers all over the world are using, so I mean, it was basically a phishing attack is what it was. And those things happen all the time. And I'm also mindful of what Tim Dyson, Lord T. Hawkeye, said about it, which is that, why does it matter? What they revealed was true. You know, it's just like, oh no, the truth came out. Oh, poor babies. You know, and another thing is, well, why didn't they hack the Republicans? Well, they tried. It's just that Republicans actually had strong passwords and had apparently educated their people about things like phishing attacks, so they got some of the lower races, like state and local races that no one really cared about, and they got some older, obsolete information from races gone by, you know, in 2012 or whenever. But they didn't get any high-profile races in 2016 because the Republicans apparently actually had some good security, so that should tell you something right there. Now, he also asks, can you recommend some good resources to investigate the minimum wage, universal single-payer healthcare, and free college? Here's the thing. The reason why I'm doing this channel is because I don't really see any good one-stop shop for all of those. My self-serving answer would be, yeah, watch my channel. And I've got lots of videos on the minimum wage, some on universal healthcare, things like that. But other than that, if I were to pick one source to tell you to go to for good information about all that, it would probably be FEE, the Foundation for Economic Education, and that's FEE.org. Please check them out. They've got a lot of great writers there. Some you're probably already familiar with, like Jeffrey Tucker, and that guy T is on there as a writer, so check it out. And then Anders writes, what are your thoughts on Hans Hermann-Hoppe? Well, mixed. He says some good things, he says some reprehensible things that I don't really like. And in a separate video, Anders actually provided a quote that is a perfect example of the things that Hoppe says that I don't like. And he quotes him saying, quote, in a covenant among proprietor and community tenants for the purpose of protecting their private property, no such thing as a right to free unlimited speech exists, not even to unlimited speech on one's own tenant property. And that completely goes against libertarianism, because if it's your property, you should be able to say what you want. But he says, quote, one may say innumerable things and promote almost any idea under the sun, but naturally no one is permitted to advocate ideas contrary to the very covenant of preserving and protecting private property, such as democracy and communism. There can be no tolerance toward Democrats and communists in a libertarian social order. They will have to be physically separated and removed from society. So not only silencing people, but segregating them as well. And I think right now what we're seeing is the foolhardiness of that, because what's happened with this election and what's happened now that Trump is in power? Well, you have people throwing tantrums and rioting and kicking Milo Yiannopoulos off of YouTube and CPAC and places like that. Oh, we've got to silence our opposition. Folks, there's this little thing called the Streisand effect. And if you try to ban something, it's really going to make people go, oh, what is that you want? Mike Masnick of TechDirt came up with it after Barbara Streisand kind of hit the ceiling after there was a photographer who took an aerial picture of her home and posted it online, and she hit the ceiling and sued to try to get it taken down. And at that point, basically no one was looking at it, but as soon as she sued, everyone was going, what's going on here? And it got passed around to far more people than would have seen it if she had just kept her mouth shut. My favorite example is Billy Joel's song, Only the Good Die Young. When it first came out, it was dying in the charts, but then a Catholic group, I believe it was actually Seton Hall, that said, oh, this is anti-Catholic, anti-Christian, anti all that is good. They might have even said it was fattening, but all this stuff. We are going to ban this record. Let's have this record banned. And as soon as they said, let's ban this record, every high school kid and college student went, what? Huh? What was that? Huh? What? There's something we're not allowed to listen to? What is this you don't want us to hear? And they went out and they bought it, and it shot up in the charts and became one of Billy Joel's greatest hits. So, yeah, nice going, guys. Good for you. So, I mean, that's probably the big lesson of 2016. If you do stuff like this, it's going to result in people like Trump getting elected. I mean, it doesn't help that, you nominated a completely horrible person in Hillary Clinton. And even then it was close, so that should tell you something. But no, the more you try to silence your opposition, even if you've got perfectly good reasons to do so, the more people are going to think, hey, maybe there's something to that. That's why you let the KKK and the neo-Nazis have their freedom of speech. I mean, I love that picture of the black cop protecting a KKK guy at one of their rallies, protecting him from violence, because that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do. You have to protect the speech of horrible people in order to protect the speech of good people. And if you're going to try to sustain your libertarian paradise by forcefully putting down opposing ideas, well, every time you use force, you're going to get the opposite of what you want. So that's it for the patrons. Let's go on to questions posed under the video itself. True Libertarian wants to know, what's worse, SJWs or authoritarian communists? And as the Austrian points out, is there really a difference? So, yeah, I mean, pretty much they all just want to use force to make you live your life the way they think you should and not the way you think you should. So I kind of paint them all with the same brush. Maybe they want different things specifically, but still, that's not really any kind of true difference. I mean, they're all bad. The Voluntarist Consumer asks, how did you come to libertarianism? Are you full ANCAP or just libertarian? And I have a video on this. I consider the difference to be largely semantic. As for how I came to it, I guess in a way I always was libertarian, but in another way it was kind of gradual. I mean, I read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress when I was a teenager, and that had a big effect on me. And I was never really a full-blown statist. I was always skeptical of gun control, even though I was mostly aligned with the left. And just as I looked things more and more, and I realized that government just doesn't work, and I think the last vestiges of statism I had to shrug off was the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I thought was a great thing, sounded like a great idea, but, a few years after and you see what it's actually doing, it's like, okay, government is not the solution for any of this. So it all came about that way, and then I got more and more familiar with libertarian philosophy. Got Nothing asks, as an advocate of the NAP, would you view violent revolution as justified self-defense against an aggressive state, or as an unjustified initiation of force? It kind of all depends. Usually I'm in the latter category, but, I mean, for example, if you look at Haiti, which was formed from a slave uprising, they had an uprising and they deposed their slave masters and the government that supported them. You could see that as being justified, but in general, violence is the tool of the state, and if you try to use violence against them, it's kind of like stepping into the ring with Mike Tyson. You're probably not going to be that successful, and all you're really going to do is kind of discredit your movement. I mean, look at Antifa now. Even if they did have some kind of legitimate point, and I have no idea what their point is, but even if they did, they pretty much delegitimized it by using violence. So, Ali Adib asks, what is it about Finland's education system that makes it the envy of the world? They have a top-down system, and I've heard they banned for-profit schools. I don't think that's actually true, but What policy or lack thereof might they owe their success to? So they talk about Finland, Belgium, Sweden, and certain other countries as having this great educational system. The thing I can't help noticing is that all of these different countries have school choice. And Sweden, I think it was more like 30 years ago, which means that for the last 10 years or so, we've been able to see what it's like for people who went through that situation for their entire school career. And I mean, they're doing great. I mean, the outcomes have just been extraordinary. Because when you do that and when you get that competition in there, schools actually have the incentive to do things better and to do things right. And when you don't have that, it ends up being a race to the bottom. Because you say, oh, well, here's a failing school. Well, obviously that school needs more money. Wait a minute. You mean we can get more money if we perform poorly? Come on, if you were being paid more money to kind of slack around at your job compared to the other people who were kind of busting their butts, wouldn't you slack around? Come on, be honest. So, that's how it is. Vagarovan asks, what other non-political YouTube channels do you enjoy watching? I really like the Twit Network, TWIT, This Week in Tech, and they've got a lot of good shows. There's Twit itself, that's kind of the flagship, and there's other ones, the New Screensavers. It's done by pretty much the same people who did Tech TV, if you remember those days. Leo Laporte is the big driving force behind it all, and they've got other good ones like Know How and Security Now and good stuff like that. Some of them have kind of drunk the SJW Kool-Aid, which is kind of disappointing, but you know, as long as they stay away from that, and mostly they're just talking about technology and related issues like that, they're pretty good. They drunk the net neutrality Kool-Aid too, which is kind of disappointing. But anyway, that's a good one. Check it out. CinemaFan97 has 3 questions. 1, what do you think of Milo Yiannopoulos? I could take him or leave him. But I think there will always be the need for the agitator. You know, whether it's Milo Yiannopoulos or George Carlin or Lenny Bruce. Not that I think Milo is on the same level as those two, but you need that person who will come out and just say the outrageous things. Because that's where you really expose a lot of the stuff. Milo is one big reason why the left has been exposed as much as it is, like when he goes to university to speak. There was one university, I forget where it was, but the students had actually paid for him to come to speak. Milo doesn't charge, but for some reason they had to pay, I don't know, the student council or whoever, when no other group ever had to do that. And then they also had to pay for extra security when no other student group had to do that. Because, of course, these conservatives are horrible, violent people. And then Black Lives Matter crashed it, grabbed his microphone, started blowing whistles into it, things like that. And Milo's attitude actually kind of makes me respect the guy, because his response was to try to engage them in a dialogue, but they were having none of it. So all the security that they had been forced to pay for, they were just standing around doing nothing. And it's like, what? You know, and the people started chanting, do your job, do your job. So it's stuff like that and the riots and things like that that is really exposed the left for what it is. A bunch of violent thugs. That's all they've ever been. That's all they ever will be from day one. Really, take a look at the start of the progressive movement around, I guess, 1880, 1890. And look at what those assholes were doing. Well, they haven't changed. They've kind of fixed their rhetoric a bit, made it a little better, but they haven't changed. How bad do you think Trump will be compared to Bush and Obama? Welcome the new boss, same as the old boss. Oh, Trump's so much worse than Obama. Yeah, but Obama was worse than Bush. Bush was worse than Clinton. Clinton was worse than Bush the first, etc. It's an exponential growth curve, people. But there's no real difference. We'd be seeing the same kind of thing no matter who was president. Who would you like to see the Libertarian Party run in 2020 for president? Okay, I think what we've seen with the Libertarian Party is the debunking of what everyone says you have to do. Oh, well, you know, you can't be too extreme with your principles. You should compromise your principles a little bit and get some experienced politicians to run. Well, we did that. We had an experienced congressman in Bob Barr. We had an experienced governor in Gary Johnson with more executive experience than anyone he was running against. And what's the results? Not exactly stellar. I mean, good. I mean, you know, Gary Johnson has a lot to be proud of, but there were also a lot of missteps, and the results, I think, are probably more in line with the overall growth of libertarianism than with anything he did as a candidate. So I think it's time to go back to getting principled libertarians on the stage and really getting the message of libertarianism out there. Gage M. asks, how do you respond to the argument made by the alt-right that allowing immigrants and refugees will result in a bigger government? The idea being that they'll vote for bigger government, similar to what they had, and Sharia law. Okay, so let's think about this. Our country is terrible, so I'm going to go to a place that's better and try to make it more like the terrible country I just left. That's not making much sense to me. I really don't think people are thinking that way. And the disturbing thing about this is, if you learn from history, look back when they were building the Berlin Wall. First of all, you millennials who weren't alive back then, read up on the Berlin Wall. The Berlin Wall was a wall between East and West Berlin at a time when Germany was divided into East and West Germany, and Berlin was in East Germany, and East Germany was controlled by the communists, and East Germany was the Deutsche Demokratische Republik, and West Germany was the Bundesrepublik, and West Germany was more under the control of US and the Allies. But you had Berlin, which was smack dab in the middle of East Germany, but then you had West Berlin, which was under the control of the Allies, and so they built this wall because they were trying to stop people defecting in droves. Yes, I remember a time where we actually welcomed people defecting from Russia and East Germany and the rest of the communist bloc like that, and we realized that that was a good thing. And that's why we were strong. I remember those days. What happened to those days? Well, communism fell, and no one learned the lessons. No one learns. No one ever learns. So anyway, they had this wall there, and I mean, it was terrible. If you tried to go through the wall without showing your pass or without a pass, they'd shoot you. I mean, that's really how it was. So, I mean, it just became this symbol of everything that's wrong with communism and the violence inherent in it all. But the thing is, that wasn't what they said it was originally. It wasn't built to keep communists in. It was built to keep fascists out. Because without that wall, hey, there's all these fascists right there in West Berlin. They could just come right across the border and pass their little fascist policies here and ruin our communist paradise. So we need to build a wall to stop that from happening. Sound familiar? Does to me. Does to me. And people are wondering why I don't like the idea of a wall. Okay, Peter McCain asks, views on universal basic income. Well, it's welfare by any other name, isn't it? Kind of reminds me of Milton Friedman's negative income tax. Whereas if you made below a certain level, they actually paid you, and then you went up to a certain amount, and then you got nothing, but then you paid nothing, and then above that you started paying taxes. Probably better than what we have now. You know, if it was like a replacement for welfare and Medicare and Medicaid, but it's still welfare by any other name. It's still incentivizing failure. It's still making it so that the more you try to get ahead, the more you get dragged back. I can't remember the statistics, but it's something like if you're a single mother of two and you make $12,000 a year, then you get a certain amount of take-home pay after all the benefits you get, food stamps and Medicaid and all that. But then as you make more money, you lose those benefits. Your effective take-home pay goes down, and you have to make something like $70,000 for your take-home pay to have that same purchasing power so that you can have everything you had at $12,000. And that's not a good way of doing things. So how would it work with universal basic income? I mean, I haven't seen any specific plans, but if you say, okay, everyone gets a base, I'm just going to say $12,000 a year again. What happens if you have a job making less than $12,000 a year, you're working part-time and you're pulling down $6,000? Government says, okay, we'll give you the other $6,000, you're still making the $12,000, so why bother going into work? So yeah, these are problems. Kevin Stemplin asks, do you think Ray Kurzweil's prediction is accurate that we will be almost entirely solar for our energy by 2035? I'm really surprised if any of Kurzweil's predictions come true. That's the thing about futurists. They tend to way overestimate the short-term innovations like solar power or battery efficiency or things like that. But then they way underestimate what happens in the long term? I mean, what futurist in the 50s was predicting the internet? Science fiction writers seem to do a bit of a better job. Look at L. Neil Smith's A Probability Broach. He wrote that in 1980, and he basically predicted the internet and driverless cars and all sorts of things. There's this one character who is halfway across the continent, and she uses this thing where she's interfacing with her partner over in what we know as Colorado. This is one of those alternate reality type things. She's on a view screen, and the view screen is on this thing on wheels that keeps her up at about eye level, and then she can remotely control it and move around as everyone else does. They've got that! They've got that. They introduced that a couple of years ago, I think. So, wow. I mean, it's just amazing. Famously, Arthur C. Clarke invented the communication satellite. He described it in, I think, a short story in the 1940s, and within 20 years, they were launching him. So yeah, look more to the science fiction writers than the futurists, but really, no one knows. If they do, it's mostly a lucky guess, so we're just going to keep plugging along, and we're just going to keep advancing, and just enjoy the ride. I do think, though, and I maintain this, solar is never going to be a solution to global warming. Wind is never going to be a solution to global warming. I'm fine with supplementing our power with that, but we have to have a strong underpinning of nuclear power. Safe, efficient, carbon-free power that's actually sustainable. It runs day and night. It's reliable. It's safe, despite the fear-mongering. It's one of the safest things we have, actually. How safe do you think your car is? Come on. Perspective, people. All right, well, this is probably a good time to leave off for this video, so I'll do a part 2, and I'll cover some of the rest of the questions, and hope to see you then.